Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming down to the University of Western Australia's 2019 3-minute thesis competition finals. My name's Ben McAllister. I'm a former UWA PhD student, current UWA postdoctoral researcher, so you can't get me out of here if you try. Before we get on to discussing the event, we have to get some important business out of the way. The University of Western Australia acknowledges the custodians and traditional owners of land on which any of its campuses are located. At the main campus, Crawley, the university acknowledges the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional owners of the land on which it is situated. The Whadjuk Noongar remain the spiritual and cultural custodians of their land and continue to practice their value, languages, beliefs, and knowledge. So, we're here for the 3-minute thesis competition, which is a fantastic competition, as anyone who's ever participated in it or even seen it can probably tell you, as I'm sure the people who are waiting here excitedly to tell you about their however many final few years of research in just 3 minutes can tell you, it's both exciting and can be a little bit difficult. It's no mean feat to compress, again, anywhere between 1 and 4 or potentially more, depending on who you are, years worth of research into just 3 minutes, just one slide, no animations, no props, and pretty much just projecting it with your personality. Anyone who's done it will tell you, and you're going to see some fantastic talks today. So for those of you who aren't aware, the rules of it are, as I've just mentioned, 3 minutes, one static slide, no animations, no props. The speakers will be prompted by these wonderful lights here in front. They get a green light when they have 30 seconds left, and a yellow light when they have 10 seconds left. And then, yeah, they're hard out on that. There's a big hook somewhere that I'm going to use to yank them off if that becomes necessary. Of course, we wouldn't be doing 3-minute thesis if it wasn't for the University of Queensland, the first people to host 3-minute thesis, however many years ago. And it holds a special place in UWA's heart because we were the university to win the first Trans-Tasman 3-minute thesis competition. So, yeah, some of you have seen some things on your seat and are now giggling. So, there you go. All right, so that's the concept. You can see up here the things that they're going to be judged on. Comprehension and content, engagement and communication, that's me. So I would like to welcome our very, very important judges for the day. We have over here Professor Imelda Wilhan. Imelda is the Dean of the Graduate Research School at UWA and is responsible for leadership and management of research training across the university. Her research interests include feminist thought, popular culture, popular fiction, adaptation studies, and women's writing. And we have Professor Tim Colmer. Tim is the acting Pro-Vice Chancellor of Research at UWA and previously a graduate research coordinator and the head of the School of Plant Biology. His research interests have focused on understanding the physiology and biochemistry of plant adaptation to the stresses of salinity and waterlogging. We also have Dr. Rena Fu. Rena is a medical scientist whose research is focused on combating malaria in Papua New Guinea. She's also a passionate science communicator, author, illustrator, and singer-songwriter. As a PhD student, Rena was a finalist in UWA's first 3MT competition. Since completing her PhD, Rena's balanced university teaching, mothering, and her artistic interests to bring the world of microscopic bugs into the imagination of children everywhere. And Marilyn Pratt. Marilyn is the Business Relationship Manager of Unibank, the major sponsor of UWA's 3MT, so big thanks to Unibank for sponsoring this event. In addition to her work in various roles within the banking and finance sector, Marilyn has volunteered as a fundraiser for the Harry Perkins Institute for Medical Research and for Team Angel Wing's cancer research. So, those are the 4 judges, but there is an all-important 5th person to participate in this process, and ladies and gentlemen, that's you. Some of you will have noticed, no doubt, that you have a card on your seat where you get to vote in the People's Choice system. So there should be a piece of paper and a pen and the names of all of the different finalists. So you can put down, after they've all spoken, we'd encourage you to wait until everyone's spoken so it's nice and fair, put down in order of your preference, 1, 2, 3, however many you like, do all 12. And you can leave feedback, which will be passed on to the speakers at the end of the day. There's a column there for sort of some additional notes of things that you liked or maybe didn't like. But again, we will get onto the People's Choice voting after all of the speakers have presented. So, without further ado, I believe we'll get moving with the first speaker. Up first, we have Wesley Moss from the School of Engineering, Centre for Agricultural and Restoration Engineering. Wesley just wanted you all to know that he has injured his ankle playing netball last night, so he asked you to please excuse him hobbling onto the stage. We didn't rehearse that earlier, it was just timed naturally. Wesley's going to talk about his thesis, which is engineering harvesters to improve subterranean clover and annual medic seed production, but in just 3 minutes and 1 slide, he's going to tell you about the need for seed harvesting natural nitrogen.
Well, it turns out it's pretty significant. We use the equivalent of the continent of Africa for pastures by grazing animals, and the equivalent of South America to grow crops on. But with this much land already in use, how can we sustainably feed the 10 billion people predicted to live here by 2050? Well, fertilizers are one tool we've used to grow more food on this land, but they do have their downsides. Nitrogen fertilizer, in particular, is very beneficial for plant growth, but its production contributes significantly to global warming. 4% of all the natural gas in the world is used just to make synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. And about 1/3 of all the energy in food production comes just from synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. This isn't sustainable if we want to feed the world and battle climate change. So what's the alternative? Luckily, there are special plants that can take nitrogen from the air and put it down into the soil, acting as natural fertilizers. One of these plants, called subclover, has been used extensively throughout Australia, helping us to improve the soil and grow more crops. It's also very nutritious and is an excellent food for livestock. But if you're a farmer and you want to grow subclover, you first need the seed. So people would harvest the seed in one location to use somewhere else. This is actually really challenging because the seeds will go and bury themselves under the ground. Therefore, specialized harvest machinery was developed for the task. As an engineer, this is where I come in. The current method of harvesting literally sucks. They use these machines that are essentially giant vacuum cleaners that come along and suck up the seed from the soil. Because the seeds are below the ground, there's a lot of issues with soil erosion and land degradation. You can see just how dusty the process is in this photo. These issues are crippling the industry and have led to a number of farmers to stop harvesting seed, which may threaten its ongoing supply. So, I'm looking at engineering solutions to improve seed harvesting. I'm trying to make modifications to these current machines to improve their efficiency and reliability while reducing negative outcomes like dust. I'm also hoping to design a completely new harvester, one that moves away from vacuum harvesting and is more sustainable than the current system. My aim is to contribute to sustainably feeding the world by ensuring we can sustainably harvest natural nitrogen. Thank you.
I think a second round of applause is needed for that hop. That was very impressive. Up next, we have Lizzie Speechley from the Center for Evolutionary Biology, School of Biological Sciences. Lizzie is a behavioral ecologist with an interest in animal cognition and communication. She's currently in her first year of candidature and is supervised by Amanda Ridley, Lee Simmons, and Ben Ashton. Lizzie's thesis is titled Investigating the Relationship Between Sociality, Cognition and Communication in the Western Australian Magpie, but in just 3 minutes, she's going to tell you about bird brain, insult or compliment.
If someone called you a bird brain, you'd probably be insulted, right? But you shouldn't, because birds are actually much more intelligent than you might think. We now know that certain birds are capable of making tools, problem solving, and even of self-recognition. But what we don't know is why they have these abilities. And more broadly, we still don't actually know how intelligence has evolved. Well, what if I told you that being social might just be what makes you smarter? Sounds strange, right? But if we think of animals that we consider to be intelligent, like chimps, dolphins, even humans. They are all highly social species. And this theory makes sense when we think about all the challenges that social animals face on a daily basis. For example, they have to coordinate lots of different relationships, they need to monitor their group members, and they also need to recognise which are trustworthy and which are not. So I want to put this theory to the test, but I don't want to do it using a typical lab-based species. Instead, I want to see whether this relationship between sociality and intelligence exists in the wild. And luckily for me, we have a local population of wild magpies that we work with as part of a long-term research project. And magpies are actually an incredibly interesting species to test because they live in highly social cooperative groups, and research has already shown that they have outstanding levels of intelligence. So I'll first measure sociality using something called social network analysis, which I like to think of as a bit of a magpie Facebook because it allows me to see who's friends with who doesn't get along, and who's a bit of a social butterfly and just gets on with everyone. And I can then measure intelligence by presenting the magpies with a series of tasks to solve, just like the one that you can see up on the screen here, where the magpie has to remember where the food is hidden in that board. And through these tests, I'll be able to see whether magpies that are the most social are also the smartest. But if we think bigger picture, my research will provide fascinating insight into how intelligence has evolved. It will reveal whether social upbringing influences the development of intelligence, which can then potentially be applied to all social species, including us. And it will inform fields from conservation management all the way through to social psychology. And so my hope is that through my research, we can start to change the phrase bird brain from an insult into a compliment. Thank you.
Fascinating. Next up, we have Lucy Arrowsmith from the Oceans Graduate School. Lucy Arrowsmith's thesis is titled Movements and Behavioral Patterns of Migratory Marine Megafauna, which is very nice alliteration. And her 3MT talk title is The Cost of Warming Environment on the World's Largest Fish.
In the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, Goldilocks finds 3 bowls of porridge in the cottage. She tries the first bowl, but it's too hot. She moves to the second bowl, but it's too cold. However, the third bowl was just right. Now, instead of a bowl of porridge, picture the ocean. And instead of Goldilocks, picture the world's largest fish, the whale shark. Whale sharks are ectotherms, meaning they rely on external sources to regulate their body temperatures. So when the water temperatures are warmer, they warm up, and when they are cooler, they cool down. Now, in order to regulate their body temperature, whale sharks perform movement on a vertical plane by diving from the surface to the deep waters, as well as on a horizontal plane by migrating between open ocean and nearshore environments. Therefore, whale sharks might be using these movements in order to feel just right, and this is known as the Goldilocks principle. Due to whale sharks being found in all tropical and subtropical waters, they expose themselves to a huge range of temperature gradients. However, the fact of the matter is, our oceans are warming, and at the fastest rate ever recorded. So what is this going to mean for whale sharks? Will they be able to regulate their body temperatures as easily? What are the energetic costs going to be associated with these changes in movements? And will we find whale sharks in nearshore environments? These are just some of the fundamental questions that we need to answer in order to conserve this charismatic species. And that's where my research comes in. For the past year, I've been using ocean modelling systems to look at the changes in water temperatures in the Eastern Indian Ocean. I then overlaid this with whale shark tracking data sets to assess whether there are cues and drivers affecting the movements of this species. So far, we have found that an individual whale shark actually remained within a very specific temperature range. We also found that when this whale shark was migrating and the water temperatures were increasing, it actually remained below the surface. We therefore believe that this whale shark was avoiding the increased water temperatures at the time by remaining at depth and therefore keeping its body temperature balanced. Using this information, I can now start to look at what are the energetic costs going to be associated with these movements. As our oceans are increasing in water temperatures, it is going to have a detrimental effect on all marine life, and whale sharks are of no exception. Therefore, it is vital that we start to look at what the cues and the implications and the costs of these warming temperatures are going to have on this charismatic and endangered species in the future. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Next, we have Sahira Bell from the School of Biological Sciences. Sahira's thesis title is Climate-Mediated Threats to Temperature Reef Resilience, Disentangling the Impacts of Heat and Herbivory. And the 3MT talk title is They Can't Kelp Themselves. Take it away.
So I want to start off by telling everyone a really quick story. So the other day, I was down at Cottesloe Beach, about to go for a surf, and as I pulled into the car park, there was a lady in the car next to me, and she was yelling at her kids in the back seat. She was yelling, "You just push me and push me and push me until you push me right over the edge." And I thought, what a brilliant way to describe resilience. Now, when I'm talking about resilience, I'm talking about the beautiful kelp forests that we have here in WA, and how in 2011 we saw a potential collapse in this resilience, and this was due to an extreme marine heat wave. And we know in some spots along our coast, we actually observed 100% loss. Our kelp ecosystems collapsed, and just like the lady at Cottesloe said, these systems were pushed over the edge. And they were pushed because of the heat from the heat wave itself, and they were also pushed because with this heat came tropical fish who normally live in warm waters. So these fish moved with the heat wave into the kelp environments, and they consumed the kelps at unprecedented rates. In some areas, they literally ate everything. Now, the heat wave happened nearly 8 years ago now, and we know that the ocean conditions along the WA coast have since returned back to normal, but our kelp forests have not recovered. And this is where I came in, because I really wanted to understand why. Now, I wish I could tell you it was a really simple answer, but turns out nature is complicated. What I can tell you is that the fish that came with the heat wave and who were eating all the kelps, well, now they've pretty much gone. But we did find another potential problem, and that was around the kelp recruitment. So because we lost such a huge amount of our kelp forests right after the heat wave, it means that now we don't have many mum and dad kelps around making baby kelps. So this research is really starting to unravel the drivers of kelp loss here in WA. We show that the kelps are not recovering because there's barely any recruitment in the system, and because there are still some fish hanging around who are ready to eat those few kelps that do. Now, this is a huge shift in the community dynamics of what's an incredibly important marine ecosystem. And we know that because of climate change, shifts like this are going to start happening way more often, and they're going to become more extreme. Times are a-changing, and it's really research like this which shows us exactly what we can do to keep our kelp forests resilient into the future, because like we've shown here, they can't kelp themselves. Thank you.
Great. Next, we have Jessica Kerr from the law school. Jessica is a first-year PhD researcher and first supervisee for new Chancellor of UWA, the Honourable Robert French. Before coming to do her PhD, Jessica has just spent 5 years working on a tiny island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Her thesis title is Making Judges in New Zealand, and her 3MT talk title is Trust and Fairy Dust, talking about making judges.
You're in a room you don't want to be in. Someone has hurt you or says you hurt them. There's a stranger in a suit with your future in their hands. You're about to be judged. 3 years ago, that stranger was me, a brand new judge. What I needed in my courtroom was order, but what I craved from those people was trust. Did I deserve it? Was I up to the job? And even if I could answer that, could they? My PhD challenges the limits of talk about judges. The questions that troubled me back then are fundamental, but in our legal culture, they're hard even to ask. And as a researcher, I aim to change that. Judicial systems are notoriously secretive. To ensure every case is decided independently, free from outside pressures, judges are shielded from the world. And this independence is supposed to be a means to the end of public confidence. But even if people understood that judges need protecting, which research shows many don't, that doesn't mean every judge deserves protection. Independence assumes competence. It doesn't guarantee it. So you might think I went to judge school and was really good at it, but in Commonwealth countries, there's no such thing. Judges are just lawyers, invited by government to take an oath. The literature uses phrases like magic wand, fairy dust, baptism by fire, tax lawyer one week, judging a rape trial the next. And you can't unsprinkle fairy dust, so of course we talk a lot about choosing the right lawyers. As modern judging gets more complicated, our definition of the ideal judge gets more demanding. The problem is, this ideal judge is supposed to emerge by accident from legal practice. Judicial appointment remains an unexpected honour for a lawyer, not the result of systematic preparation for the very different job of judging. We lawyers don't like admitting we want to judge, let alone that we might need help learning how. So, we rely more and more on bringing people up to speed after appointment. But that happens in secret, behind the shield, in an awkward kind of reverse engineering. You see, to admit that any judge may not be fully across the job, at least not overnight, risks undermining the logic of the whole system. And my research aims to face that risk. It challenges us all to take responsibility for making judges that people in courtrooms know they can trust. We can demystify and support the acquisition of judicial competence, and that essential work begins with me persuading you that we need to talk about judge school. Thank you.
I'm sure, of course, Jessica would agree that our esteemed panel of 3-minute thesis judges today are beyond reproach. Next, we have Terence Chia from the Business School, Discipline and Management of Organizations. Terence has just started his third year of candidature. When he needs to de-stress from thinking about the complexities of human behaviors in the workplace, he cooks and bakes to reward himself with food. His thesis title is Pathways to Managing Multicultural Teams, and today he's going to be talking to you about knowing your onions.
Really, we are all just like onions. Like onions, individuals are layered and complex. Like onions, we sometimes make people cry. Spending time on a relationship is like caramelizing an onion. We can taste the sweetness from it. Like us, the onion has to go to work, and this is what the work team often looks like. Here, individuals are layered and complex. We come in all different shapes, colors, and size. Each has a different expertise, like forming a base layer of a dish or the garnish on top. Here, holding this team is an invisible force called diversity climate. Diversity climate is the policies and practices that best encourage diversity in the team. Research tells us that diversity climate leads us to better workplaces, but nobody knows how to create it. Organizations pour a lot of resources into such efforts. In the US, organizations spend $8 billion a year on such efforts, yet results do not look good. Researchers are not sure what the missing ingredients are that can create good diversity climates. My research aims to solve this mystery. I want to find out what leads to the creation of a diversity climate that can help diverse teams like this to be effective. I started my research by interviewing 65 working professionals across Perth. And today, I can share one finding with you. Participants report how important it is to make everyone feel included in the team. Nothing surprising, right? There's a secret sauce. We must also recognize the differences between self and others in an appreciative manner. Doing so, we can help retain everybody's personal identity, culture, and ideas, as well as consider the differences in a trusted team environment. Outcomes of my research can benefit workplace in positive ways. Resources can be better allocated. Diversity initiatives will be better designed, and as a result, overcome dread and skepticism sometimes associated with diversity training. We all know how to include people. With your teammates next time, spend that time understanding their unique point of views. To experience that sweetness in that relationship, you've got to know your onions.
Fantastic. Next up, we have Shima Matuka from the School of Human Sciences. Shima's thesis title is The Role of Kisspeptin, Androgen, and Diet in Polycystic Ovary Syndrome. I'm very impressed. I read all of that right the first time. And today, Shima's going to talk to you about solving the puzzle of polycystic ovary syndrome.
Look at this beautiful young couple and imagine that they're thinking to have a baby in the near future. But sadly, having their own baby might not be a possible choice for this couple. Currently in Australia, 1 in 6 couples have infertility issues, and in 40% of the couples, the cause of the infertility is found in female reproductive functions. And one of the main causes of infertility in females is polycystic ovary syndrome, which is normally called as PCOS. PCOS is a reproductive health problem which affects at least 1 in 10 women of reproductive age. Despite its high prevalence, there is no established cure for PCOS because the mechanism of PCOS is not fully understood yet. So my question is, how exactly does PCOS occur? Many studies have suggested that the leading cause of PCOS is the imbalance of hormones, especially increased level of androgen, which is a male hormone, is widely accepted as the main cause of PCOS. However, the detailed mechanism is still unclear because the workflow of hormones in our body, including androgen, is very complicated as so many hormones affect each other in our body. So, what is the other factor which connect the dots between the imbalance of androgen and PCOS? In my master research, I am focusing on candidate neuropeptides called kisspeptin and TAC2, which are the critical regulators of reproductive functions and are also influenced by androgen. Therefore, I am examining if there is an interaction between these hormones to develop PCOS. So far, we have found that the TAC2 gene expression in the brain is reduced in the absence of androgen receptors in a mouse PCOS model. Now let's go back to the beginning of the talk and think about this couple. If she had PCOS and it was difficult for her to be pregnant, this couple might have to give up having their own baby. Actually, I don't think having their own baby is necessary for this couple to be happy. But I believe whether we have a choice or not really changes our lives. And I hope my research will lead to understand the mechanism of PCOS so that one day a cure is found and people will have more choices in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Danielle Finn from the School of Psychological Science. Danielle is supervised by Rodrigo Becerra, Giles Gignac, Mike Weinborn, and Carmela Pestel. Danielle's thesis title is an investigation of alexithymia and emotion regulation as predictors of functional outcomes in adults with acquired brain injury. But today, she's going to talk to you about emotional blindness, alexithymia after brain injury.
Imagine watching the end of Titanic. Jack and Rose are surrounded by freezing dark water. Rose turns to Jack and sees a blue face rimmed with frost. Her face twists in pain as it dawns on her he is dead. When I watch this scene, I feel distraught, anguished. How on earth could they kill Leonardo DiCaprio? But for someone with alexithymia, they literally have no words for emotions. People with alexithymia cannot identify and communicate their own feelings. They're emotionally blind, so distinguishing happiness, sadness, love is incomprehensible. Now, you may think this doesn't apply to you because your emotions are in check, but alexithymia can occur after brain injury, and brain injury is common. In fact, in Australia, over 700,000 people currently live with brain injury. Now, we know that alexithymia sometimes occurs after brain injury, but we don't know the extent to which this happens. I'll be conducting a comprehensive review to estimate the prevalence of alexithymia following a brain injury so that we can determine just how common this problem is. And my preliminary analyses show that, yeah, it is quite common. So the next question I want to ask is, well, what are the consequences? I want to know, does having problems identifying emotions after brain injury impact the daily lives of these people, such as return to work, community and social integration, their relationships? Because so far, most of the research in recovery after brain injury has focused on the physical functioning deficits and the cognitive functioning deficits, such as memory and attention. But there is this whole understudied area of emotional functioning that may be a powerful factor in how well someone recovers. Because the research shows that people with alexithymia, well, they have poor emotion regulation. They have great difficulties maintaining relationships, and they have more aggressive and impulsive outbursts. So a lack of emotional well-being may be impacting quality of life more so than the physical and cognitive deficits. But we need my research to determine this. If we do find that alexithymia is linked to poor recovery, well, then we can target emotions in rehabilitation. So it's crucial that we start assessing emotion after brain injury, especially considering that emotions make up such a huge part of who we are. I'd like you to envision sharing a joyous moment with a loved one suffering from alexithymia, and they can't share in that joy with you. Just like the iceberg that sunk the Titanic, their emotions are beneath the surface, causing havoc and destruction in their lives. My research will have critical implications in emotion-based intervention so that these people can navigate the deep, dark ocean of their emotions. Thank you.
Fascinating stuff. I hope you've all been keeping track of what you've liked and what you've preferred and etc. because we've got 4 speakers left. We've already got through 8. Time flies when you're hearing about research. Next up, we're going to have Charlotte Berkmanis from the School of Biological Sciences and the UWA Oceans Institute. Charlotte is a marine ecologist with a research interest in predator behavior and ecology and media portrayal of sharks and other predators. Charlotte is currently the Secretary, Student Representative, and Conference Social Media Manager for the Australian Marine Sciences Association and Volunteers for Surf Life Saving Australia. Her thesis title is Spatio-Temporal Distribution of Indo-Pacific Marine Predators, but today she's going to tell you about sharks and where to find them.
Why do you live in Perth instead of Iceland? If our climate and the clear waters of our beaches have something to do with your decision, you have more in common with sharks than you might think. But let me explain. Today I'm going to share with you where sharks are, why they're there, and whether we're protecting them. In my thesis, I looked at 23 different species of sharks, but today we'll be focusing on makos, the Ferraris of the ocean, because they can swim up to 74 kilometres an hour. But is this fast enough to avoid extinction? We kill 3 sharks a second, and in March, makos were declared as endangered. But so what? If you're among the millions that have been terrified by the movie Jaws, you might be thinking, what have sharks done for me lately? Well, if you eat tuna, like coral reefs, are among the 1 in 7 people on the planet that rely on our oceans for protein, sharks have looked after you. Sharks are the doctors of the ocean. They regulate our food chains and keep our fish stocks healthy. It takes a long time to train a doctor, and it takes a very long time to breed a mako. The females don't reproduce until they're 19 years old, and even then they only produce a handful of pups every 3 years. We don't actually know a lot about our sharks, but we do have information about the hunters that catch them. I use commercial fishers logbook data from the 7 million square kilometres of Australian waters. I look at the environment where the sharks were caught using satellites, things like water temperature, clarity and depth. And then I develop statistical models to predict where sharks like to live. And what did I find? I found that mako sharks prefer certain water temperatures and clearer waters offshore. Now I know this, I could look at other parts of Australia to find these Goldilocks areas. And here are the results. I found that they prefer certain temperatures and clearer water offshore. And if you look at this map where it's red, this is where mako sharks like to live. Next, I wanted to see if we're protecting them. So I overlaid our marine parks. Again, where you see this red shining through, these are the areas where mako sharks like to live that's not protected by our marine parks. So in summary, just like us, makos prefer certain water temperatures and clearer waters, but they're a lot further offshore than we're comfortable going. We have a great opportunity. Australia governs a large area of ocean, and we already have our marine parks in place. Together, if we protect where these sharks like to live, we can help them keep our oceans healthy. Thank you.
And if the previous talks about ocean water temperature didn't convince you, ocean water temperature is really important, not just to us, but also to sharks. Now we're going to have Katrina Doughty from the School of Biological Sciences. Katrina's thesis title is Modifying Black Soldier Fly Larvae to be used as a dietary inclusion for rainbow trout aquaculture. And today she's going to tell you about reducing global food waste through insect farming.
How many times have you brought groceries home and ended up throwing them out before you even had a chance to eat them? You are unknowingly contributing to one of the least addressed global polluters, global food waste. 1/3 of all food that we produce for human consumption is wasted. So for every 3 McDonald's burgers made, 1 goes directly into the trash. If you look at how much land we devote to growing food we throw out every year, it is equivalent to 1.5 Australias. And if it was a country, it would be the 3rd largest producer of greenhouse gas emissions. And yet, we are not addressing this issue with the severity that it needs to be addressed. In my thesis, I will look at taking global food waste and turning it into global food product through insect farming of the black soldier fly. These amazing insects will eat any organic material, and they eat a lot. Our current experimental setup, which is only the size of a walk-in refrigerator, can eat up to 500 kilograms of food waste every day. Imagine scaling that up to an industrial scale. Once harvested, these bugs are 40% protein and 30% fat, making them an extremely high-value food product. But what do we do with these insect protein balls once we've harvested them? I plan to incorporate them into the fish farming industry. Now, this is because aquaculture is currently the world's fastest growing food production sector and accounts for 50% of all seafood consumed by humans. If you compare it to pig or cattle farming, it can have a lower environmental impact if done responsibly and sustainably. But the largest sustainability issue we still face today is that we rely on massive amounts of wild-caught fish to produce the fish meal that we use to make their diets. Interestingly, we found that when these insects are fed certain waste products, they actually have a nutritional profile very similar to that of fish meal. In my thesis, I'll be looking at physiology and diet manipulation of these insects to try to produce a product that better mimics fish meal so that I can replace 100% of the fish meal in diets for rainbow trout. This will create a closed waste cycle where humans create food waste that feeds our insects. These insects will feed farmed fish. Fish can feed us, and we'll create more waste again. With the human population projected to hit 10 billion people in the next 70 years, we need to better manage how we sustainably produce food and limit food waste if we want to live on a planet that can carry us into the future. Thank you.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, we are down to our final two speakers for today. Up first, we have Alessandro Silvestri from the UWA Law School. Alessandro's thesis title is The Revolving Door of Modern Warfare, Civilian Direct Participation in Hostilities. And today, he's going to tell you about the revolving door of modern warfare, civilian direct participation in hostilities. Thank you.
Meet Mark and Francis. Mark and Francis are two individuals wearing plain clothes in two different conflicts that have nothing to do with each other. Both of them are driving ammunition trucks towards the front line. Now, you are a military official. Your soldiers are looking at you. What do? Do you clear your soldiers to shoot and kill Mark or Francis, Mark and Francis? What do you do? What are your deciding criteria when you do that? I can see from your faces there is a lot of indecision, and that is completely normal because, to tell you the truth, as things are standing right now in the international community, all of you would be acting lawfully under international humanitarian law. But there is a problem there in that case, isn't there? When we talk about human lives, when we think about human lives, we usually like to think that we can account for them in a consistent and, as much as possible, especially in warfare, fair manner. And right now, this is not being done. But let's just take a step back and take a look at what the law has to say about this. War has rules, a lot of them. But perhaps the most important one is the general protection afforded to civilians. However, there is one exception. Civilians are protected unless and for such time as they take a direct part in hostilities. And this is where Mark and Francis are sitting, legally speaking. However, the problem is the international community has not been able to give answers or guidelines or deciding criteria to decide what direct participation in hostility is. Therefore, this is where my research comes in. And there are three main questions which drive the purpose of my research and my thesis. Number one, where do we draw the line between a civilian and a soldier? Number two, what do we even mean when we say direct participation? I mean, obviously, if I lift a gun and I shoot it, that's obviously direct participation. But what if I'm driving an ammunition truck? Number three, and finally, unless and for such time as. Does it mean that the moment I drop my gun, I regain my protection? Literally, maybe so. But in practice, my research will attempt to insert more of a causal understanding of this requirement. In conclusion, without my research, Mark and Francis's lives are at risk of being misjudged. And with this research, I will want to ensure that their lives can be protected when they should be. It is not good enough to just come up with rules if we cannot ensure that they can be applied consistently and fairly. We as an international community need to do better. My research will do better. Thank you.
Very important stuff. And moving on to our final speaker for the day, we have James Yude from the School of Humanities, Discipline of English. James is in his first year of candidature. His supervisors are Professor Ned Curthoys and Professor Kieran Dolan. His thesis title is Antipodean Fairy Tales, Locating the Fairy in Australian Landscapes. And today he's going to tell you about, well, his talk title is Once Upon a Time in a Land Down Under.
Once upon a time, in a land far, far away. We all know these words, and we know what they signal. It's a fairy tale about to begin. But what exactly comes next? Is it a princess trying to find her prince? Or perhaps a poisoned apple and an evil queen who lives in a dark castle? What about the story of a girl who lives in a tower? We all know that one. But this girl can't get married until her suitor guesses every type of gum tree, every species of eucalyptus on her property. Probably not the fairy tale you were thinking of. How about the story of a boy who fights sharks in the Great Australian Bight and is guided by a wily, talking magpie? No, I'm not making these stories up. They're Australian fairy tales, and they're also what I'm researching. The aims of my research are twofold. Firstly, I want to demonstrate a sustained tradition of engagement with the fairy tale genre within Australian literature, from settlement all the way to the present day. This involves archival work through libraries and databases, and while I'm only in the early stages of my research, I've already found a vast body of texts which engage with fairy tale tropes, themes and plots, yet set their tales within Australian landscapes. This leads to the second aim of my research, which is to investigate the creative treatment of Australian landscapes within these fairy tale works. Essentially, by exploring how the mundane Australian landscape is enchanted, I hope to explore one of the overlooked genres which Australian authors have used to negotiate our often problematic history and explore complex social issues. When people think of Australian literature, they often think of a harsh, gritty, realist novel set in the outback. But the fairy tale genre has been used since the 19th century to explore ideas and themes in a much more accessible way, especially for children. For instance, recent writing by local Perth author Sean Tan has sought to infuse suburbia, the place where most people now live, with magic. In doing so, Tan has been able to explore issues of immigration and culture, storytelling and tradition. Other recent fairy tale works, such as Alexis Wright's Swan Book, have sought to deal with the problematic relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And by creating a fairy realm within the country, she has been able to more freely explore and express her very complex ideas. My hope is that this research will shed light on texts which have been forgotten from our past or overlooked in the present, and demonstrate the importance of the Australian fairy tale genre.
And we shall soon know whose fairy tale has come true today, because that is the final finalist in the 3-minute thesis competition. So can we get a round of applause for all of the speakers again? And now the judges will take their leave to adjudicate on who the victor of today's proceedings is. And in the meantime, we're going to take care of the People's Choice Award. So I'll get you all to grab your sheets and spend a couple of minutes thinking about what you liked, rank them as many as you like in order. Any feedback you've got will be passed on to the participants, so have a look.